9/11, I became consumed with what was happening in this country. And similarly, this man was murdered. He was one of the victims of the murderer I mentioned before. I reached out and I called. I did massive amounts of research. Ultimately, I called and connected with the families. This is me with the wife of this man I just showed you, who was Hindu, who was murdered in Texas. And we are standing exactly where her husband was murdered. We are smiling because this woman works every day now where her husband died. And this is her life, and this is 4 years later that we are in this setting, because I've had kids say to me, well, what's wrong with you? You're smiling where her husband died. This is her life. Obviously, she smiles occasionally now. She also cries, quite regularly. So I began to incorporate these stories into my work and into my efforts. And I'm really extremely interested in how do we get into one another's lives and living rooms. Because I don't think that coming to interfaith programs and doing a lot of the things that we all do is enough. We have to figure out how to really get to know each other as people. And that's one of the things that I'm really interested in. For myself, being an ally has gotten me into the homes of the families of people who I otherwise never would have been a house guest in a Sikh family's home, in a Hindu family's home, a Muslim family's home. Once you're in that setting, I'm not at all interested in religious tenets and precepts and what is in anybody's holy book and what anybody's prayers say. If I had another lifetime, maybe I'd be studying comparative religion. It's interesting, but it isn't my passion. I want to know who you are as a person. I want to see you as a mother, as a member of your community. The man who was murdered in the gas station, I've stood there, I've talked to his customers. You could pull into his gas station without enough money to fill your tank, and you could leave. You could drive away with a promise that you'd return to pay. That's how generous he was. You don't know those stories. We don't know those stories until we know each other one-on-one. So how do we get into each other's lives and living rooms? This is my living room. And every year we host a sharing party. We invite virtually everybody we know and people we've just met, and we ask them if they want to bring a poem, a song, a story, a piece of their artwork, their work in progress, their play in progress, and share it with others. And food, of course, we share food. And because of this, the conversations that ensue and the connections that ensue happen between the guests and the other guests, because they see a slice of each other's soul. They see something that they can connect with. They're not just asking each other, what do you do for a living, or where do you live, or those kinds of questions that we all ask at parties when we don't know what to say. So I'm so concerned about what we can do about this, what's going on now, the strategies, the initiatives. This picture is from Billings, Montana, a story of a Jewish family who had a menorah in their window. A rock was thrown through the window in a hate attack against Jews. The response of the town was that the local paper, printed full-size menorahs in the newspaper, and people cut out the menorah and pasted it in their windows and stood in solidarity like the non-Jewish Danes who wore Stars of David on their sleeves and said, we are in solidarity with Jews under the Nazis. We need to be creating initiatives, and we need to be in rooms with each other, Sikhs and Muslims and Hindus and the people who are most under the gun. We need to be strategizing, and there are ways in which Jews and Muslims can work and strategize together. And I have some of very specific ideas that I would like to share. I know that my time is up. And I did bring business cards, and I brought brochures, and I brought some reprints of that article, and I brought them for you. I carried them, and they're heavy, and I'd like to share them with you, and have you contact me and think of me in ways that we can work and do this work together, and this very, very necessary work that we need to do, because it's a very, very chilling moment that we're in. Thank you very much, Anya. Some points that we should take away that I really enjoyed hearing that we're each a slice of each, or to get a slice of each other's soul. I thought that was very poignant. And I think we really need to reflect on that almost at all times. Like, is when we think of something that's within society, to ask ourselves, is this okay as is? And if not, what are ways that we can work to change it? And lastly, as you said, this is not just a Muslim problem, but a human problem. And you're talking about how, stereotyping, appearanceism, it's a universal problem that has gone throughout history. And so very, very good. Thank you very much, Anya. So I'm proud to introduce our last speaker for the evening, Farah Pandith. Thank you very much for coming all the way up here. You work more or less to engage the Muslims around the world, working with them on a people-to-people and an organizational level. Your work is phenomenal in that you're introducing more or less the United States to the Muslim world. And that in itself, of course, is breaking down stereotypes. It's, of course, building bridges and connecting people and encouraging collaboration. And that's very on point with tonight's conversation. So without further ado, Farah Pandith. Well, good evening to everyone. All right, I'm going to wake you up. I want to tell you a little bit about my job, why we have a special representative to Muslim communities. I want to tell you what I've seen around the world, and I want to have a great conversation with you. Okay? You both set me up for explaining why action is important. And I want to thank you both for really terrific presentations. It was very hard to listen. It was very hard to see data collected and put so starkly up on the screen. I'm going to move the needle just a little bit and talk in a more optimistic way because I see optimism in the job that I do. And many of you will think she's crazy, but let me explain why. For the first time in American history, we had a president who stood on the steps of the Capitol in his inauguration address and spoke to the world in his inauguration speech and said that he wanted to build partnerships with Muslims around the world that had never been done in American history. A couple of months after President Obama was president, he went to Turkey and spoke to the Turkish parliament and again talked about the desire he had to build dialogue and partnership with Muslims around the world. All of you in this room, I don't even have to ask how many people heard him speak in Cairo. I know every single one of you did. And I'm sure many of you went back on YouTube and heard him again and again talk about his vision to engage with 1/4 of humanity. That is unbelievably important. Our Commander-in-Chief put out a vision, a direction for our nation, and how he wanted to build cohesion, partnerships, dialogue with 1/4 of humanity. And he talked about all the tools, some of the tools rather, in our toolbox. All of the tools can be amplified through coalition building. But some of the things he talked about were things that we know that are really important. Open up new opportunities to speak to each other by talking about things in ways that are respectful of everyone and in ways in which we can work on things together, the areas of common interest. So when the president talked about wanting to engage with Muslims around the world based on mutual interest and mutual respect, he talked about doing that on issues such as health or science and technology or education or exchanges or entrepreneurship. And he asked every single part of our government to do this. So whether you're the Department of Education, whether you're the Department of Commerce, whether you're the Department of State, where I work, we are all working to amplify the president's vision. Now, 2 weeks after the president gave his speech in Cairo, Secretary Clinton asked me to be the special representative to Muslim communities. I have a global mandate. The office is built
so that I work with our embassies around the world, Muslims in Muslim majority countries, and Muslims that live as minorities. That is really important because we were talking about the diversity of Muslims around the world. We are giving dignity to the diversity of Muslims around the world. We certainly understand that a Muslim in Sao Paulo is as Muslim as a Muslim in Stockholm or as a Muslim in Surabaya. How do we as the United States understand the diversity? How do we reach out and make a difference in the way in which we're connecting with Muslims around the world? She also asked me to focus very specifically on the grassroots. So when you heard in my introduction that I'm doing people-to-people engagement, it means that while some parts of the Department of State are working on a government-to-government level and are working on bilateral issues, I'm going community to community. I'm going into countries and going into schools, into mosques, into community centers, talking to entrepreneurs and hip-hop artists and poets and others that make up civil society, because we're trying to find ways that we can listen to civil society and take their ideas and move them forward. Very specifically, too, I'm focused on people under the age of 30. Not that people over the age of 30 don't matter. Of course they do. But when we look at the demographics worldwide, and we see 1.6 billion Muslims on the planet, most of those Muslims are under 30. And this is a generation that I call Generation Change. These are young people who are digital natives that have grown up in the Facebook age. They're connected to each other. Their ideas are amplified in brand new ways. And in fact, what I've been saying is that there's a youth wave going on around the world. That young people under the age of 30 are shaking it up. They're asking us to look at themselves differently. They're asking us to connect their ideas. They're creating new opportunities for us to learn from them and work with them. When we think about the context of Muslims in this demographic, we have to understand that ideas that are spread around the world aren't contained by regions. They're not contained by which country you're talking about. These young people are sharing ideas across the world. And what we're trying to do is harness their energy, leverage their ideas, and create new networks so that we implement new narratives. For a very long time, the narratives that were out there were that there was an us and a them. President Obama talked about the fact that there is no us and them, there is just an us. And if we are going to work with people around the world, we have to be on an equal playing field, and we have to be able to engage and understand and listen to what it is they have to say. What we're doing with our embassies around the world is going deep and going wide. We are getting to know the next generation. We're taking their ideas, connecting them to each other, moving their ideas forward, and trying to find ways that the United States government can use its strength to be the convener, the facilitator, and the intellectual partner with the ideas that we hear on the ground. Now, when I was in graduate school in the early 90s, we talked a lot about an article that came out in Foreign Affairs magazine written by Sam Huntington called The Clash of Civilizations, that there's a West versus Islam. Guess what? Muslims are part of the West. There is no us and them. Muslims are in every part of the world. What we have to do is find ways to understand the nuances, be respectful, and do as much as we can to break down the stereotypes.